All right, so this Bastille Blades exclusive knife thoughts video is going to be kind of a comparison of these knives here. And these are the Great Eastern Cutlery number 82 Coon Skinner, the Great Eastern Cutlery number 81 Possum Skinner, and the Great Eastern Cutlery number 81 Dixie Stock Knife. So these are three different but very similar patterns of knives, and I just wanted to kind of show some comparison between the different versions of these. So first of all, this one, the Coon Skinner, was loaned by Jewel from Bastille Blades for this video. And to be completely honest, I have never purchased the Coon Skinner version of the 81. I have had other versions, the Moose, and I gave one of the Stockman versions of that pattern to my dad, but I've never had the Muskrat pattern. So that's what this Coon Skinner is. It is a Muskrat pattern knife. And what is a Muskrat pattern? So it's normally a serpentine handle shape. So you can see this has this serpentine kind of S-shaped handle. And then it has two main blades, and the most traditional version, or a normal Muskrat, has two what are sometimes called Muskrat clip point blades, or Turkish clip point, or slender clip point, different names for them, but this really long clip on this clip point. So, not like something, just what I have lying around here, like you might see on a number 35 with the much shorter clip length. A Turkish or Muskrat clip point blade has a really long clip point that makes for a very slender blade, and it actually has two of those. So it has the exact same blade shape on two different blades, and they are full-size blades. And a really traditional Muskrat is a single spring knife, as this is. And so why would you want two of the same blades? Well, as the name kind of suggests, these knives were intended for trappers, so people that trapped for fur taking, and muskrats are one of the animals that is trapped for fur taking. And for that type of task, where you'd be skinning the fur off and trying to keep it as intact as possible, these types of slender, kind of delicate, task-oriented blades are what you want, because really you're just kind of skinning around the head and the feet. And why would you want two? Well, if you're doing a lot of that skinning, if you're doing it, as a business, then it's good to have a second blade that you can just switch to. So let's say you're skinning a bunch of muskrats or, raccoons. With this blade, it gets dull. You can just switch right on over to that second blade. And so the reason I never got one of these is that I just, to be completely honest, don't use my traditional knives in a way that necessitates being able to switch quickly to a sharp blade, particularly one of the same blade shape. But, and to be completely honest, I've never skinned a raccoon or a muskrat. But I have skinned deer, and it does, wear the blade. So I can definitely see where you would need that, particularly on something like, a muskrat or a raccoon or whatever you're skinning for the fur, a smaller animal, where you would be cutting around the bone. That definitely does, dull a blade. So, it makes sense that you would want two blades. One thing I wanted to mention about this knife specifically that kind of makes me regret not having gotten one of these is that this micarta is way nicer in person than I expected or thought from seeing pictures of it online. So this is the red onion micarta, and of course, at least, I guess not of course, but in my opinion, red onions themselves are really pretty. They're a very pretty color of purple. But in pictures online, I never really thought that this looked that good, but in person, it looks really great. There's a nice variation of a dark kind of brownish to a tannish, and then a very nice purple. So this does look really good in person. Now, there is another type of muskrat knife, or muskrat pattern, which is the Hawbaker muskrat. And so there was a person who is a very well-known trapper, trappist. I'm not sure which is the right term, but his name was Stanley Hawbaker, and he also had a kind of outdoors store. And he ended up commissioning some knives that were called Hawbaker trappers, or Hawbaker Muskrat knives, that had, instead of two of those clip point blades, a clip point and then a Wharncliffe. But unlike this knife, it was a full-length Wharncliffe. So that's another type of Muskrat knife, but I really wouldn't consider this a Hawbaker Muskrat. This is the Gradation Cutlery number 82 possum skinner. So we've got the Coon skinner and the possum skinner. And it's not what I would consider a Hawbaker Muskrat, because while it does have the same type of, Turkish or Muskrat clip point, and it is a single spring knife, and it is a serpentine frame, the secondary Wharncliffe is much less than a full-length blade. So whereas, a Hawbaker Muskrat, it would be a full-length blade, it would come the whole way up here. This is not quite a full-length blade. Now, I think that this is one of the most utilitarian two-blade knives that you can get. I did make a little modification to it here by adding this easy open notch, or like pseudo easy open notch on each side for the nail nicks. But I really love this possum skinner. I think it's a great knife, and it's what I would consider an improved Muskrat. So rather than a Hawbaker Muskrat, it's an improved Muskrat, which is a name that was sometimes used for Hawbaker Muskrats, or I should say knives that had all of the features of Hawbaker Muskrats, but were not actually ordered and sold by the Hawbaker company. Because to be like a true Hawbaker knife, it has to have been commissioned and sold by the Hawbaker company. So another name that's sometimes used for that type of Muskrat knife is an improved Muskrat. And where I wouldn't call this a Hawbaker style, both because it was not commissioned by the Hawbaker company and because this Wharncliffe blade is not a full-length blade, I would call it an improved Muskrat. Now, one other thing to note in difference between this knife, or rather these two knives, and the number 81 is that I always get the 81 versus 82 mixed up. Yeah, 82s, 81. Another difference is that these 82s are rounded bolsters versus the 81 has squared bolsters. So you can see that's another difference, and that's really the main difference between these two pattern numbers, is rounded versus square bolsters. So I just wanted to show this one also. This is another knife on the same 82 frame, another serpentine, and interestingly, it's a very different knife with two of the same blades of the previous one. So this is a Dixie stock knife, is what Gradation Cutlery calls it, and really it's a kind of, I would call, an improved Stockman. So I say that because normally a Stockman knife has a clip point blade, often not a Turkish or Muskrat style clip point like this, but rather a full-sized, and then they typically have a spay blade, whereas this has more of a drop point blade. And then they typically have a sheepfoot blade, whereas this has a Wharncliffe blade. So this has the same Wharncliffe blade and Turkish clip point, or Muskrat clip point, as the 82, and a very, very similar, if not the same, clip point blade as that 81. So even this has some similarities to the other two, although it is more different. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about the Muskrat and improved Muskrat is that it's interesting to see the kind of similarities to a trapper. So the trapper pattern is a knife that typically has, like the Muskrat, two full-size blades. But what's usually called a trapper is, rather than a multi-blade knife, where there are blades coming out of each end, both blades come out of the same end, and it's usually a two-spring, multi-spring knife versus a single-spring knife. Now, trappers typically have a clip point and a spay blade, so a little bit of a different kind of setup. But interestingly, there is what's sometimes called an improved trapper. So like an improved Muskrat, there is what's called an improved trapper. I didn't get mine out because it's in a display but GEC has made them as well as lots of other companies. And an improved trapper typically has a clip point, and rather than the spay blade, a full-size Wharncliffe. So it's really interesting to me to see how these two patterns, the Muskrat and the Trapper, have similarities. Now, a Trapper is typically a dogleg type pattern or swell center dogleg, whatever you want to call this type, handle, and it's not typically a serpentine. But it's very interesting to me to see the similarities where they both have full length blades, and they have both, had a clip point blade as one of their main blades, but have also been improved by making the second full-size blade a Wharncliffe. So just kind of some thoughts and I think interesting comparison between a few different knives, traditional patterns. And like I said, I didn't have and don't have one of these Coon skinners, the Gradation Cutlery number 81 Muskrat pattern knife. So thank you to Joel of Boss Steel Blades for loaning this. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel here. Also check out Knife Thoughts, where I post videos on knives like these. My website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like these and knife related topics. And check out my social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.